How do you tell your only daughter that you just shut down 55 wedding venues because her fiancé said you were not the right kind of guest? How do you stay calm when the people you raised and funded decide you're good enough to pay, but not good enough to be seen? This is how a quiet father, who spent 30 years building the local wedding industry, answered that call. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. My name is Michael Reyes, and I am the kind of man people forget at the end of a long table. I am 59 years old. I work in event logistics. Most people think this means I move chairs and carry boxes. That is fine with me. They do not need to know that, behind my quiet job title, I have a hand in more than 50 wedding venues in our region. I do not wear expensive suits. I do not post my life online. I have a small house, an old car, and one daughter I thought I would do anything for. That evening, I stood outside a trendy downtown restaurant, smoothing down my jacket. It was the best I owned. Dark blue, a little tight around the middle now, but clean and pressed. Through the big windows, I saw white tablecloths, soft light, people laughing over glasses of wine. At the far end of the room, I saw my daughter, Chloe, with her fiancé and his parents. They fit that place perfectly. I knew I did not. Inside, the hostess looked me up and down. She asked if I was with the Cole party. I said I was Chloe's father. She smiled in a polite way that did not touch her eyes and led me through the room. Past tables where couples in sharp clothes talked about trips and promotions. The Cole table was long, packed with people. I noticed that there was one empty seat, all the way at the far end, near the kitchen doors, next to a stack of spare menus. The hostess pointed there. She said that seat was for me. Chloe was in the middle of the table, glowing under the warm light. She wore a simple white dress, and her hair fell in soft waves. I felt my chest tighten with pride and something else I did not want to name. Her fiancé, Brandon, sat close to her. He had his blazer over his chair, sleeves rolled up, watch shining on his wrist. He looked like an advertisement. They were laughing with Brandon's parents and with my ex-wife Karen and her husband Andrew. It took a while for anyone to notice I had arrived. Chloe finally saw me and waved quickly, then turned back to the conversation. Brandon lifted his hand in a casual greeting without turning his head. I sat down at my lonely end and picked up the menu. The prices made my eyebrows lift a little. I did some fast math in my head. I could afford it, but I knew I would feel it later when I sat down to pay bills in my small kitchen. I told myself it was fine. This was for Chloe. A server came and poured water into my glass. He asked if I was with the Cole family and if I wanted to add my card to the tab at the bar. I said I would settle later. He gave me a polite nod and moved away. Food arrived. Plates I could not pronounce, arranged like artwork. I watched the others clink glasses and lean close for pictures. The conversation floated down the table in pieces. I caught phrases. Someone talked about a new condo. Someone else talked about a business trip to Europe. Karen laughed and said Chloe had always had expensive taste. Andrew added that it was a good thing she was marrying into the right crowd. At some point, Brandon's mother, Valerie, tapped her glass with a spoon. She announced that she wanted to say a few words. Everyone quieted down. Her voice carried easily to my end. She talked about how proud she was of Brandon. She said he had always been driven and that now he was building a life with a woman who matched him in every way. She turned and smiled at Chloe, calling her polished and modern. Then she glanced toward Andrew and said that Chloe was lucky to have had such a stable father figure in her life. She spoke about Andrew's career, his good advice, how he had guided her through school and into adulthood. People at the table clapped. Someone made a joke about Chloe marrying a man like her dad. My hands tightened around my water glass. For a second, I thought maybe Valerie would look my way and mention me too. She did not. It was as if my years with Chloe, the nights at the kitchen table with math homework and science projects, did not exist. When the noise died down, I cleared my throat and started to speak. I wanted to say something simple. I wanted to say that I was happy for my daughter and that I hoped she would always feel safe and loved. My voice did not carry. Only the woman sitting directly across from me looked up. Then the server came back to our end with a tray of drinks, and laughter rose again in the middle. My words died in my chest. I took another drink of water instead. Later, dessert arrived. Tiny slices of cake with flowers on top. Brandon leaned back in his chair and called down the table that he was glad I could make it. He said he knew long days in warehouses had to be tiring. I corrected him quietly that I did logistics planning, not warehouse labor. He laughed and said that either way, it was respectable blue-collar work. He added that the important thing was that real career moves were being handled by the younger generation now. Several people chuckled. It was not cruel, just careless. That made it worse in some way. After dessert, the talk turned to the wedding itself. Flowers, music, guest lists. Valerie said that modern weddings needed to feel curated, like a story. Karen agreed and started talking about which relatives would look good in photos. Brandon threw out ideas about a live band and special lights. Chloe looked down the table at me. She raised her voice so I could hear. She said that there was one more thing she wanted to ask. She reminded me that we had already talked about me helping with the venue deposit. She then said the venue had an upgraded bar package with signature cocktails and that people expected that now at weddings. She asked if I could cover that too, since guests would notice. Brandon added that it would be the least I could do for Chloe's big day, after everything she had been through growing up. He said this like it was a joke, but there was an edge to it. I felt a few heads turn toward me, waiting for my answer. I thought about my mortgage, my old car, the quiet evenings when I sat alone with leftovers in front of the TV. Then I thought about Chloe at 6 years old, in a princess dress, spinning in our small living room. I said that I would take care of it. Valerie smiled and gave a satisfied nod. The conversation moved on. For them, it was settled. By the time the check came, I felt tired in a way that had nothing to do with my age. The staff placed the long bill folder near Andrew and Brandon. They glanced at it, then slid it down toward me. Andrew thanked me, almost as an afterthought, for handling this one. I put my card in without saying anything. When I stepped out into the night air, the city lights were bright against the dark sky. I watched the others spill out of the restaurant in a laughing group. They gathered near the entrance for photos. Andrew and Chloe posed together while Karen adjusted her hair. Valerie told them to squeeze closer. The flash from someone's phone lit up their faces. No one asked me to join the photo. I stood a little to the side, hands in my pockets. For a second, Chloe's eyes flicked toward me. I thought she might call me over. She did not. Brandon pulled her close around the waist, and she turned back toward the camera. I walked to my car, an old sedan with a worn steering wheel, and sat there for a moment with the engine off. The restaurant noise came through the closed windows as a soft blur. I stared at my own reflection in the glass, gray at the temples, lines around the eyes, suit at least 10 years out of date. At home, the house was quiet. I hung up my jacket, loosened my tie, and went straight to the small living room. The couch sagged a little in the middle from years of use. On the shelf above the TV sat a picture frame, the silver paint flaking at the edges. It held a photo of Chloe at 8 years old, missing her front teeth, arms wrapped around my neck. My hair was darker then. We both looked like we believed I could fix anything. I picked it up and brushed a thumb over the glass. For a second, I thought about the years between that photo and the scene at the restaurant. The school plays where I was the only parent in the front row. The nights I worked extra shifts so she could go on class trips. The time she cried at 16 because she had failed a test, and I stayed up all night helping her study. I set the frame down and turned on my old laptop. The startup noise always sounded a little tired, like me. The wallpaper came up, a high-resolution image of the main ballroom at Harbor Light Pavilion, one of the flagship venues my company worked with. I had stood in that room the day we finished the renovation, looking up at the crystal chandeliers and polished floors, feeling a quiet pride. People like Brandon did not see that side of me. To them, I was just a man in an old suit, sitting at the edge of their table. I opened my banking app and checked the payment I had made for dinner. Then I went into my email and saw the invoice Chloe had forwarded earlier that week for the first venue deposit. I had already paid it. I scrolled past rows of messages from venue managers, suppliers, and clients. My professional world, the one where people called me Mr. Rays and asked for my opinion. A buzz from my phone pulled me out of my thoughts. The screen lit up with a new message from Chloe. She wrote that she hoped I had not embarrassed myself too much at dinner. She said that Brandon's parents had certain expectations and that she needed me to be careful with what I wore and how much I talked at events. She added a reminder about the deadline for the upgraded bar package, attaching a fresh invoice. I stared at the screen for a long moment, the glow lighting up the small room. The house was completely silent. Outside, a car passed by, then nothing again. I did not answer right away. I put the phone face down on the coffee table next to the old photo frame and leaned back into the couch, feeling the weight of the evening finally settle on my shoulders. A few people think that disrespect comes all at once, like a slap in the face. In my experience, it is slower. It comes in small, polite pieces. A missed thank you here, a strange look there, a joke that lands just a little too hard. You tell yourself it does not matter. You tell yourself you are too sensitive. By the time you realize something is wrong, it has been wrong for a long time. The morning after that dinner, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and the old photo albums spread out. I do not know why I took them down. Maybe I needed to remind myself that I had not dreamed those years. The kitchen is nothing special. Faded tiles, cabinets I painted myself once, a small table pushed up against the window. The fridge hums a little too loud. On the wall, there is a calendar with appointments written in neat blue ink, venue tours, staff meetings, invoice due dates. In the corner, one date had a pink heart drawn around it. Chloe's wedding, in her handwriting from months ago, before any of this started to feel wrong. I flipped through the album pages. There was Chloe's first day of school, her backpack almost bigger than she was. There she was at 10, standing next to a science fair project we had stayed up past midnight building together. Me, tired and unshaven, crouched next to her, holding the display steady. Back then, it was just us. Karen had left when Chloe was 10. She told me she felt trapped, that she wanted something more. There had been arguments whispered in the hallway at night, the kind you do not want your child to hear, but they always do. One day she was gone, and a few months later I heard she had met Andrew. I will not pretend I was perfect. I worked long hours. I missed a few school plays because a client crisis came up at the last second. But when Chloe was sick at 2 a.m, it was me sitting on the bathroom floor with her. When she was scared of thunderstorms, it was my hand she held. When she needed help with forms for college applications, it was my tired eyes reading the fine print. I did not think about those things as sacrifices at the time. They were just what a father does. I closed the album and checked the time. That evening was the engagement party at Karen and Andrew's house. They had sent a formal invite, printed with gold letters. They wanted everyone to dress garden chic. I wasn't sure what that meant. I ironed a simple shirt and found a pair of clean slacks. I decided that would have to be enough. Their house is in a nice suburb with wide streets and tall trees. There are stone lions on either side of the front steps. I parked down the block where the smaller cars were. By the time I walked up, the backyard was already full of people. It looked like a magazine spread. White lights in the trees, tables with pastel cloths, a long buffet with tiny labels in front of each dish, a bar set up under a white canopy, music playing from hidden speakers. Chloe saw me come through the sliding glass doors and waved. She looked beautiful, of course. A soft dress that moved when she walked, hair pinned with fresh flowers. I felt that mix of pride and distance again, like watching someone I used to know from far away. She hugged me and said she was glad I made it. Her voice was warm, but a little rushed, already pulled toward other people. Brandon came over, put his arm around her, and started telling me about the caterer, the DJ, the guest list. He mentioned numbers and packages and ideas for creating a brand around their wedding. I nodded and tried to follow. Karen walked over a few minutes later. It still feels strange to see her in that big house, in that world, as if the woman I married had been rewritten. She smiled, kissed my cheek in a quick, polite way, and told me I looked nice. She added that she hoped I would remember to keep conversations positive today, because this was about Chloe and Brandon now. Andrew joined us, holding a glass of wine like he was in a commercial. He was charming, as always. He asked about my work and told me he had a client who might need a good logistics man. He said it in a tone that made my job sound smaller than it is. I said I appreciated the thought. As the evening went on, people drifted around the yard. There were little clusters of conversation. The important people stood near the bar and the speakers. The older relatives and the quieter guests sat at the tables closer to the fence. That was where I ended up, with a plastic cup in my hand and a paper plate balanced on my knee. From there, I could see everything without being in the way. At one point, someone tapped the microphone. The music cut down. Andrew stood near a makeshift podium with a big smile. He said he wanted to say a few words about Chloe and Brandon. He talked about how proud he was of them. He said he felt honored to watch Chloe grow into a strong, smart woman. He used phrases like guiding her through her teens and supporting her choices. People clapped and laughed and raised their glasses. I stood near the fence, sip of wine unfinished, and listened. Nobody looked back at me. Nobody seemed to think it was strange that Andrew spoke like he had been there for every parent-teacher conference, every broken bone, every late-night talk about boys and exams. For the crowd in that backyard, the story they heard was simple. Andrew had been the rock. I was just there. I thought about saying something after he finished, maybe just a sentence or two. But as soon as he stepped down, Brandon's father jumped up to talk about business and future plans. Then Valerie took the mic to talk about family legacy. The moment slid away like a plate cleared from the table. Later in the evening, Chloe came over with some of Brandon's colleagues from work. They were young, well-dressed, all with the same kind of practiced smile. She introduced me. She said with a little laugh that this was her other parent, the one who lived more simply. They laughed politely. One of them asked if I was retired. Another asked if I was in construction or something. Chloe changed the subject before I could answer. I do not think she meant to hurt me. I think she wanted to make everyone feel comfortable, but standing there, holding my cup and smiling in that tight way you do when you want to disappear, I felt smaller than I had in years. A few days after the party, Chloe asked me to come with them to a wedding dress boutique. She said it would mean a lot if I saw the dress. That touched me, so I went. The shop was bright and soft, with big mirrors and chairs for family. When we walked in, the clerk greeted Karen and Valerie like old friends. Chloe went off with them to look at gowns while I stayed near the front, pretending to browse. Soon, a dress was chosen, then another. They came out of the fitting room one after another. Each time, everyone clapped and said she looked perfect. I joined in because she did. She looked like the little girl in my photo albums, all grown up and shining. Then came the talk about money. The clerk brought out a folder and started explaining prices and fittings. She placed the folder on the table between Karen and Valerie, then turned to Andrew and thanked him for coming as the father of the bride. She said it was always nice when fathers were so involved. Andrew smiled and shrugged, like it was nothing. Karen corrected the clerk with a laugh, saying there were 2 fathers in this situation. The clerk looked confused. Her eyes flicked between me and Andrew. For a long second, I thought maybe she would ask who had been there first, or who was paying. She did not. She just smiled again and joked that Chloe was extra lucky. In the end, when it was time to put a card down for the deposit, Karen turned to me. She said she knew I had promised to help and that this would be a good place to start. Valerie added that this dress was an investment in memories, and that I would not want to be the reason Chloe could not afford the one she loved. I took out my wallet. I put my card on the table. Andrew did not stop me. He just watched with that polite half-smile. The clerk ran the payment and handed the receipt to Karen. On the drive back, Chloe sat in the front with Brandon. I drove behind them in my own car. At a red light, I watched them in their rearview mirror, heads close together, laughing about something on his phone. The next day, he posted a picture from the boutique with a caption about family support and grateful for our village. In the photo, Andrew stood next to Chloe, holding the dress bag. I was in the background, half cut off by the frame. That night, after work, I came home to another quiet house. The engagement gifts on my dining table still had shiny little cards on them. I microwaved some leftovers and sat in front of the TV, not really watching. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was a message from the family group chat. The name they had given it was the Coleshaw Reyes clan, with a lot of heart emojis. Chloe had posted a long message. She thanked everyone who came to the engagement party. She said she felt so supported by her parents. She tagged Karen and Andrew together and wrote that she could not imagine better guides into this next chapter. Then she added a line about the wedding plans. She wrote that, after thinking about the flow of the day, she had decided that the father-daughter dance would be with Andrew, since he would also be the one walking her down the aisle. She said she hoped everyone would understand and support this choice, and that titles do not always match the roles people play in your life. The reactions came fast. Heart emojis, clapping hands, comments about how sweet it was. Valerie wrote that it was perfect and modern. Brandon wrote that Andrew had earned it. Karen said she was crying happy tears. Nobody tagged me. Nobody asked what I thought. I scrolled through the thread, my thumb slow on the screen. The little typing dots appeared for a moment under my name, then disappeared. I had started to write something and stopped. I did not trust myself to put any words there that would not sound bitter or needy. I set the phone down, face up this time, and stared at the bright screen until it dimmed on its own. The room felt even quieter than usual. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. A car door slammed. Life went on outside my walls. Inside, I sat very still at my small table, with the album still stacked on the chair beside me, and I understood, more clearly than before, just how far I had been moved from the center of my own daughter's story. The day the line was crossed did not start out any different from the others. I woke before my alarm, as I usually do, and lay there for a minute in the dim light, listening to the old house settle. My back ached a little, my knees complained when I swung my legs over the side of the bed. None of that surprised me anymore. I brushed my teeth, put on my work clothes, and packed a thermos of coffee and a sandwich into an old black bag. On the kitchen wall, the calendar hung where it always did. The square with Chloe's wedding date still had the pink heart she had drawn months before. I paused and looked at it, my hand resting on the fridge door. For a second, I thought about taking the calendar down. I did not. I closed the fridge, picked up my keys, and went to work. That day, I was supervising a big corporate conference in a downtown hotel. The ballroom was not one of my company's own venues, but we had designed half of the logistics. The hotel staff knew me. They greeted me by name, asked about my weekend, and handed me the schedule without fuss. The morning passed in the usual rhythm: checks before guests arrived, microphones tested, chairs lined in straight rows, coffee stations set up just so, with extra sugar packets because I knew this crowd. Someone always needed more sugar. An hour before the keynote speech, a problem hit. The keynote speaker's flight was delayed by fog. The manager from the client company rushed over to me, pale and panicked. He explained that without the keynote, the whole day would fall apart. He said people would demand refunds. He said his boss would blame him. I listened. I let him pour out the fear. Then I took a breath and started doing what I always do. I asked about the speaker's expected arrival time. I checked the schedule and saw a breakout session we could move up. I called the tech team and asked if we could beam in the keynote by video for the first half. I walked over to catering and asked if they could shift the lunch service 30 minutes later. It took 10 phone calls and 5 brisk walks across the hotel, but within 30 minutes we had a new plan. When the guests filed in, they never knew there had been a problem. They sat in their chairs, drank their coffee, and listened to the adjusted program. The client manager came over during a short break, his shoulders much lower now. He told me that he did not know how I stayed so calm. He said I had saved his job that day. I shrugged and said this was just my work. In that professional world, I knew my worth. My age, my experience, my quiet way of thinking ahead. Those things were useful there. Though it was during one of the short breaks, as the lights dimmed and people filtered back into the ballroom, that my phone buzzed in my pocket. I checked the screen. It was Brandon. I hesitated for a second. I considered letting it ring. Then I stepped out into a side corridor away from the noise and answered. His voice was bright at first, as if he was making small talk. He asked if I was busy. I told him I was between sessions at work. He said he would not keep me long, that he just had something important and adult to discuss. He started talking about the wedding. He said they had been reviewing the guest list and the flow of the day with their planner. He explained that they wanted a certain story to come across to guests and on social media. He mentioned brand, image, and coherence, words I knew from my own industry, but that sounded strange coming from him in this context. Then he said it. He said that they had decided they only wanted certain people at the wedding. He said some people did not fit the image they were building. He said my presence might confuse the story they wanted to tell, especially since Andrew was already taking on what he called the father role in the ceremony. For a moment, I did not quite understand. I asked him, as calmly as I could, what he meant exactly. He explained that it might be easier for everyone if I did not attend the wedding in person. He said he thought I would be more comfortable anyway, not having to deal with the crowds or the formality. He framed it like a kindness. He added that they still very much appreciated the financial support and the venue help. He said they were counting on me for the upgraded bar package, some decor, and possible discounts at any venue where I had connections. He told me that, even if I was not physically there, I would still be part of the foundations of the day. There was a strange ringing in my ears while he spoke. Not anger, exactly. More like the sound when you close a heavy door and everything on the other side becomes distant. I leaned against the cool wall of the corridor and looked at my reflection in a narrow window. A man in a simple suit, tie a little crooked gray at the temples. A man who had just been told that his presence at his own daughter's wedding did not fit the brand. He said that he hoped I understood and that he knew I would not want to make things harder for Chloe. He said something about me being good at taking one for the team. That last part echoed in my head. I felt something rising in my chest, an old reflex to argue, to explain, to beg for space at the table. And then, for the first time in a long time, that reflex stopped. It was like a switch clicked off instead of on. I told him I understood. My voice sounded steady, even to me. I said I needed to get back to work. He thanked me for being mature about it and ended the call. I stood there for another minute, phone in my hand, listening to the muffled sound of applause from the ballroom. Then I put the phone back in my pocket and went to finish the event. The rest of the day went smoothly. The keynote finally arrived in person and shook my hand, saying I had saved his schedule. Staff thanked me as they packed up equipment. The client manager told me they would be requesting me by name for their next conference. I nodded, smiled, and drove home at the end of the night in my old sedan, the kind that blends into the background of parking lots. On the way, the city lights blurred a little on the windshield. I did not turn on the radio. I drove in silence, replaying Brandon's words in my head. Only certain people. Not the right image. My presence confusing the story. My money welcome. My actual body not. By the time I pulled into my driveway, something inside me had settled in a new place. I went inside, took off my shoes by habit, and walked straight to the small room I call my office. It used to be Chloe's bedroom. The marks from her posters are still faintly visible on the walls. Now there is a simple desk with an old laptop, 2 metal filing cabinets, and shelves lined with binders. Some are new, some are so old the labels have been replaced twice. On the top shelf, there is a small wooden box where I keep printed photos and old notes. I turned on the lamp. The yellow light filled the room and made the metal drawers shine a little. I sat down in my chair, the one that squeaks if I lean too far back, and stared at the cabinets for a long moment. Most people in my personal life think I am a mid-level logistics guy who works events here and there. They do not know the whole story. They do not know about the time, 15 years ago, when 2 small wedding venues were about to close and I stepped in with a group of partners to restructure their debts. They do not know that the structures we built back then turned into a network of more than 50 venues over time. My name is not always on the signs. I am not the face of any brand. I learned early that I prefer it that way. But buried in contracts, operating agreements, and booking systems, my name appears. My company, small on paper, sits in places people do not see when they walk through the doors for their big day. I stood up and opened the top drawer of the closest cabinet. The metal slid on its rails with a familiar scrape. Inside, rows of hanging folders rested in neat lines. Each had a white tab with a name: Harbor Light Pavilion, Willow Bridge Gardens, The Atrium, Riverstone Hall, and many more. My fingers moved over the tabs until I found the one I needed: Harbor Light Pavilion. I took it out and placed it on the desk. Then I pulled another folder from a different section, this one labeled with the name of the first venue Chloe and Brandon had booked before they changed their minds. I opened the second folder and pulled out a thin stack of papers. On the top was a copy of the booking contract. The client name was not Chloe or Brandon. It was mine. I had made the payment and signed as the responsible party. Their names appeared as notes in the event details section, not as the legal clients. I flipped through the pages slowly. There were clauses there I knew by heart: cancellation rules, reputation protection, right of the venue to refuse service under certain circumstances. At the time, I had signed them without thinking. It was just standard language my company used. I set those papers aside and opened the Harbor Light folder. Inside were floor plans, staffing agreements, promotional brochures, and the operating agreement between the managing company and our holding group. A lot of words and numbers, the kind of thing Brandon would probably never bother to read. I ran my finger down the page where the partners were listed. My name was there in small print: senior partner, silent role, voting rights in certain decisions, authority over internal booking policies. I closed the folder and leaned back, listening to the faint creak of the chair this time. On the wall, an old dry erase board still hung where Chloe once wrote math problems. Now it held a crooked list of upcoming events and dates. I picked up a red marker and circled one date: her wedding day. The same date that had the pink heart on the kitchen calendar. The circle looked different in red, harder, sharper. Then I opened my laptop. It hummed to life, the screen showing the familiar wallpaper of the Harbor Light Ballroom. I created a new document and titled it with 2 simple words: Cole Wedding. Then I changed it to Cole Wedding, internal notes. I started typing. I wrote down the amounts I had already paid, the dates of each transfer, the names on each invoice. I wrote down, in plain language, the way I had been moved from father to invisible sponsor. I wrote about the engagement party speech, the dress boutique, the group chat message about the father-daughter dance. I wrote about the phone call that day, in the hotel corridor where I had been told that only certain people belonged at my own daughter's wedding. I did not use emotional words. I wrote it like a report. Facts, dates, names. It was easier that way. When I finished, I sat with my hands resting on the keyboard. The room was very quiet. I could hear the faint tick of the old clock in the hallway. I realized then that something in me had changed. I was done trying to fit myself into the story they wanted to tell. I was done being a ghost at the edge of their photos while my bank account sat at the center of their plans. I would not shout. I would not beg. I would not make a scene. But I would not pay for my own erasure. I reached for my phone, lying face down on the desk. The screen lit up when I touched it. The last message visible was still Chloe's reminder about the bar package, her words about expectations and not embarrassing her. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I needed: Helen Park. She had been my friend and lawyer for years, the one person who knew the full map of my business life. She had seen the contracts when we first built the venue network. She had helped me draft the trust for Chloe's future. For a long second, my thumb hovered over the call button. This was the point where I could still decide to stay quiet, to keep absorbing the small cuts until the wedding was over and I could go back to my simple, lonely peace. I pressed the button. The phone began to ring, the soft vibrating sound filling the little office as the red circle around the wedding date stared back at me from the wall. Helen picked up on the third ring. Her voice sounded the same as always, steady and alert. She asked how I was. I said I was fine. I told her I needed to talk about a family matter that was also, in a way, a business matter. She did not ask for details over the phone. She just said we should meet at her office the next afternoon and that she would make time. After we hung up, I sat there in my little office for a while, listening to the quiet. The red circle around Chloe's wedding day stared at me from the whiteboard. I turned back to the laptop and opened my messages. If I was going to talk to Helen, I wanted everything in front of me. Not feelings, not complaints. Facts. I went through my text conversations with Chloe first. I scrolled slowly from the sweet early messages about dress shopping and cake tasting, down to the more recent ones about money and image. I took screenshots of the ones where she asked for upgrades because people expect it now, and the one where she said she hoped I would not embarrass myself. I saved the message where she reminded me not to talk too much and to dress in a way that would not stand out. Then I opened the family group chat. It hurt to read, but I made myself do it. The long message about the father-daughter dance. The line about titles not matching roles. The hearts and clapping hands from everyone but me. I took screenshots of those too. Next, I opened my messages with Brandon. There were not many. Short, practical texts at first, at times, addresses, simple questions about deposits, then the longer one about his ideas for the bar, and finally the call log from that afternoon, the one where he had told me I did not fit the image. I could not record the words after the fact, but I could at least mark the time and length. I moved all the screenshots into a new folder on my computer and named it something plain, Wedding Messages. Then I backed it up to an external drive I kept in the bottom drawer of my desk. I also forwarded a few of the worst messages to my email so I could show them easily on a bigger screen. None of this was angry. It felt more like cleaning out a closet, sorting things into clear piles. This goes here, that goes there. This is proof. That is noise. The next afternoon, I drove downtown to Helen's office. The building was tall but not flashy, with a stone front and clean glass doors. Inside, the lobby smelled like coffee and fresh paper. I rode the elevator up, watching my reflection in the steel doors. Shirt pressed, tie straight, face calm. Helen's office was on a corner, with a big window and shelves of dark wood. Framed degrees hung straight on the wall. A plant in the corner tried its best to reach the sunlight. Her desk was neat, with only a few files open at a time. She stood when I entered and shook my hand. There was concern in her eyes, but she did not push. She just asked me to sit and offered me water. I told her everything, starting from the dinner at the long table and ending with Brandon's phone call. I kept my voice even. I spoke as if I was giving her a report on a difficult client, not my own child. That was the only way I could get through it. She listened without interrupting much. Sometimes she wrote a few notes. Sometimes she asked me to repeat a date or a phrase. When I finished, she sat back in her chair and tapped her pen once against the pad. She told me, in simple terms, what I already knew, but had pushed to the back of my mind. She reminded me that to Chloe and her new circle, I looked like a man with a small house and a simple job. But on paper, in the world of our regional event network, I was not small. She walked me through it again, slower this time. Years ago, when we had rescued those early venues, we had set up a holding company. Over time, that company gained minority stakes in many other venues, sometimes as a lender, sometimes as a partner. We owned pieces of booking systems. We held certain rights to approve or deny events. In some cases, like Harbor Light, our influence was strong. In others, it was more subtle, but still there. She reminded me that many contracts for big events went through my firm first, even when clients did not see my name. She reminded me that the first venue deposit for Chloe and Brandon's original choice had been made by me as the legal client. She pointed out that, on paper, they were guests of my booking, not independent customers. She pulled a file from one of her drawers and flipped it open on the desk. I saw my signature on the first page, and her handwriting in the margins here and there. I did not read every clause. I did not need to. She had written them with me years ago. She told me there were sections in those contracts that allowed us to cancel events under certain conditions, things like damage to the venue, non-payment, and reputation risks. There were parts that gave us control over how our partners' names and images could be used. She did not tell me what to do. She never did. She only laid out the tools on the table, like a mechanic showing me the parts of an engine. Then she asked me a simple question. What did I want? For the first time since this began, I let myself answer honestly. I said I did not want to destroy my daughter's wedding. I did not want some big dramatic scene that would live on in stories forever. I did not want to hurt her just to hurt her. But I also said I could not, in good faith, keep paying for everything and offering up my network, while being told to stay home like some shameful secret. I said that if they were going to erase me from the story, then my money and my work should not be part of that story either. Helen nodded slowly. She said that sounded fair. She said I had the right to draw that line. She also said, very clearly, that whatever I chose to do must be done by the book. No tricks, no lies, no sudden illegal moves, just contracts, rights, and clear boundaries. We talked through some options. She asked questions like, what if they move to another venue? And what if they try to pressure you through family? I answered as best I could. We did not sign anything new that day. We only reviewed what already existed and what it allowed. Before I left, she looked me in the eye and said that being calm did not mean being weak. She said some of the most powerful moves she had seen in court came from people who never raised their voices once. On my way out of the building, her words stayed with me. Over the next week, I worked as usual. Conferences, small weddings, vendor meetings. I wore my normal clothes and followed my normal routines. On the surface, nothing had changed. Inside, I was paying more attention. In my home office, I began to make a more detailed list. I wrote down names of venues and what role my company held in each one: owner, partner, lender, or advisor. Next to each, I noted whether Chloe and Brandon had mentioned that place. Willowbridge, the Atrium, Riverstone. I remembered passing comments Chloe had made about a rooftop garden or a rustic barn. I added those to the list too, with question marks. I also wrote down the names of people I trusted in the network: managers, coordinators, owners who had known me for years, people like Marcus Hill at Harbor Light Pavilion, who had been there since our first renovation, people who remembered who showed up when times were hard. One afternoon, my phone rang while I was checking table layouts for a small charity gala. It was Marcus. His voice was friendly as always, but there was a trace of something else, like he was choosing his words carefully. He said he had heard that Chloe and her fiancé were planning a wedding soon. I said that was true. He said he assumed they would want to host it at Harbor Light, since it was our flagship. I told him that nothing was final yet. Then he hesitated and asked if he could buy me a coffee the next day near the waterfront. He said there were a few things he wanted to run by me, venue-related. I agreed. The next afternoon, we met at a small coffee shop a short walk from Harbor Light. It was one of those places with mismatched chairs and chalkboard menus. The windows looked out over the water. Couples passed by holding hands, and tourists took pictures with the skyline in the background. Marcus was already at a corner table when I walked in, 2 mugs in front of him. He stood to shake my hand and then sat back down, looking uneasy in a way I was not used to seeing. He told me that some of the staff at Harbor Light had been excited when they heard my daughter might choose their venue. They liked me. They wanted to do something special. But then he said he heard parts of a different story. He said that Chloe and Brandon had been in touch with Harbor Light and a few other venues in our network. They had been dropping my name to ask for consideration, implying that I would back the event. At the same time, they had made odd requests about photos and seating. They wanted to know if it would be possible to keep me out of certain shots, to direct staff not to mention me to other guests. Marcus said the tone of the messages had bothered him. He said he had seen couples act entitled before, but this felt different. He said it felt like they were using me as a discount code while trying to hide the fact that I existed. I listened, my hands around the warm mug. I asked him if he had copies of those messages. He said yes. The venue kept records of all event communications. It was part of our training. He said he had not sent anything to me yet because he wanted to talk in person first. We sat in silence for a moment, watching someone walk past the window with a bridal magazine under their arm. Marcus finally said that, to him, I had always been the picture of a father who did the hard work quietly. He said the idea of me being treated like some embarrassment in my own venues did not sit right with him. I felt something in my chest loosen when he said that. It is strange how a few words of simple respect can do that. As we talked, the bell over the coffee shop door rang. A young woman walked in, shaking off the wind from outside. She wore a staff badge on a lanyard, and I recognized her face from one of our smaller venues. Lila Santos. I knew her as a sharp, organized coordinator who had joined our network a year before. She saw Marcus and smiled, then her eyes landed on me. Her smile faltered for just a second, like she was unsure if she should approach. Marcus waved her over. He said my name, then hers, and reminded us we had met once at a training. She nodded quickly and looked from him to me, choosing her words. She said she was sorry to bother us, but she had heard we might be talking about the Cole wedding. Her voice was low, careful. She said there was something she thought I should see, if that was all right. She pulled out her phone and tapped the screen a few times. Then she turned it around and slid it across the table toward me, the device stopping just at the edge of my mug. On the screen, I saw an email thread open, my last name bolded in the middle of a paragraph. On the screen, the email thread was open, the glow bright against the dark wood of the coffee shop table. Lila had scrolled to the middle of the chain and paused there. My last name, Reyes, was in bold, surrounded by sentences that felt sharp even before I read them. The email was from Chloe's address, but I could see Brandon's style in the wording. They were writing to Lila's venue about a possible booking. They mentioned that I had connections in the industry, and that they expected consideration on price and dates because of that. They also wrote that I was only there to fund things, and that for image reasons they wanted to avoid having him appear too much in the story we're creating. In another line, they asked if the staff could help manage the situation by keeping me out of certain pictures and directing me toward more discreet seating if I did attend anything there. I read those lines twice. I did not say anything for a moment. My face felt oddly numb, like when you come in from the cold and your skin has not caught up to the warmth yet. Marcus watched me carefully. Lila shifted in her chair, uncomfortable. She said she knew she was not supposed to share client emails, but that, in this case, she could not ignore it. She said it did not sit right to see my name used like that. I thanked her. My voice sounded calm, even to myself. I asked if I could get a copy of the emails. She said she could forward them to my personal address, and that the venue kept everything backed up anyway as part of our system. Marcus nodded and added that, if needed, he could pull threads from Harbor Light and other venues too. We finished our coffee. I did not talk about plans or revenge. I only said that I appreciated their honesty and that I would handle things through the proper channels. Those were the words I chose. When I left the coffee shop, the wind from the water hit my face, cold and sharp. I walked slowly back to my car, hands in my pockets, thinking about how Chloe must have felt when she typed those words, or watched Brandon type them. Did she feel anything at all? Did she pause, even for a second, before pressing send? At home, I went straight to my office again. The email copies from Lila and, later that day, from Marcus arrived in my inbox. I saved them into the wedding messages folder, along with everything else. I made a second backup on the external drive. Then I closed the laptop and sat there in the squeaky chair, staring at the whiteboard. The red circle around her wedding date seemed to glow on its own. The next time I saw Helen, the file in my hand was thicker. I walked into her office with an envelope full of printed screenshots and email pages. She greeted me with that same steady look and cleared space on her desk. We went through the papers together. I laid them out in order: text messages, group chat posts, then the emails from venues. The picture they formed was not dramatic in a movie way. There were no big insults, no shouting in all caps. It was quieter than that. More careful, that made it heavier. There were phrases like only there to fund things, not our vibe, doesn't fit the story, keep him out of photos. There were lines about using my name for discounts and access, followed by instructions to keep me away from the parts that would be seen. Helen read each page slowly. When she finished one, she tapped it once with the tip of her pen, then moved it to a new pile. Her face did not show much, but the lines around her mouth had tightened. She said once again that she would not tell me what to do, but she pointed to the growing stack and said quietly that this was enough to justify two things. First, it justified me stepping back from sponsoring the wedding. Not in an emotional storm-out way, but in a clear, written way. Second, it justified, under certain contract clauses, a review of whether hosting this event, under my company's name and in our venues, was good for our reputation. She reminded me it was not about punishing a rude comment. It was about the pattern: public erasure, misrepresentation of who had built and backed the network, and using my connections while telling others to hide me. We discussed options for over an hour. Everything stayed in words. We did not draft any final letters in front of me yet. She explained paths, pros and cons. I listened, asked questions, and kept my voice level. In the end, I asked her to help me do 3 things, all inside the lines. First, I wanted to adjust my personal promises to Chloe, the trust we had set up years ago with money for her future. Second, I wanted to review the internal policies at our venues connected to our holding company, especially the ones where my signature carried extra weight, like Harbor Light. Third, I wanted a clear, written way to say that I would not be funding or fronting a wedding where I was deliberately erased. Helen nodded. She said those things were possible. She said they would take a little time and a few signatures, but that we were not breaking any rules. We were just using the ones that already existed. We set a date for me to go to the bank and to a notary office to sign modifications for the trust. I left her office that day without any dramatic feeling. I felt tired, but also very clear. The bank building was newer than Helen's. It had shiny floors and walls that tried hard to look rich. A young man in a suit met me in a small glass-walled room and laid out papers on the table. A notary sat across from me, checking my ID. I did not read every line. I had already gone through the main points with Helen. The trust we had built for Chloe when she was younger had been simple then. Money for a down payment one day, money for emergencies, money for special events like her wedding. At the time, I had written it in a way that assumed we would always be close. Now, with Helen's help, we were adding some conditions. Respect, contact, basic acknowledgement. Nothing extreme. I was not asking for loyalty oaths. I was just making sure that the person Chloe chose to be in her life long term, the version of me she kept or erased, would match the person who received long-term support. The notary pointed to the places I needed to sign and initial. My name looked smaller than usual on the page. It did not matter. The ink still counted. While I signed, I thought about the night Chloe had moved into her dorm. I had carried boxes up 3 flights of stairs because the elevator was broken. At the end, she had hugged me and whispered that she would make me proud. I wondered, as my pen scratched the paper, if she would say the same thing now. When it was done, the bankman gathered the documents and said they would be processed and filed. The notary stamped her seal with a soft thump that sounded louder in my head than in the room. After that, I walked to a nearby park instead of going straight home. There was a bench by the river with a view of the water and a small bridge. I sat there and watched people pass by. A couple took engagement photos on the grass, the woman in a white dress that fluttered in the breeze while the man adjusted her hair. They laughed when the photographer told them to look at each other. I watched them for a moment, then looked away. My eyes went to the water, where sunlight broke on the surface in small, bright spots. I thought about Chloe at 6, dropping ice cream on her shoes and crying like it was the end of the world. I thought about Chloe at 12, sitting at our kitchen table, saying she was embarrassed that I did not have a bigger job. I thought about Chloe at 19, calling me from her dorm when she ran out of money, voice shaking, and how I had driven 2 hours with a bag of groceries and a folded envelope of cash. I realized something simple and painful. I loved my daughter, but I could not make her see me. Not the real me, not the man who existed outside of her current circles and stories. What I could do, though, was see myself clearly, and act like my own dignity mattered, even if hers did not. Sitting on that bench, with the wedding date circled in red on a calendar in my house and stamped in my mind, I made a quiet promise to myself. I would not shout. I would not fight for the last chair at their table. I would simply remove the parts of my life they were using without respect, and I would do it in the only language they seemed to understand: contracts, bookings, and money. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. The family group chat was active again. Chloe had posted photos from a new visit to a venue. High ceilings, big windows, a view of the water. I knew that room before the caption loaded. Harbor Light Pavilion. She wrote that they were so excited. She said they had found the perfect place and added a line about how connections help sometimes. There were more hearts, more comments. Andrew wrote that it looked like a dream. Valerie said it was exactly their level. Brandon joked about pulling the right strings. I looked at the photo closely. I could see the chandeliers I had chosen, the floors I had argued to upgrade, the railing I had insisted we reinforce for safety. That ballroom had been a mess when we first found it. Now it was the jewel of our network. I felt something like a small, tired smile pull at the corner of my mouth. The board really was set now. The next few days were strangely calm. On the outside, life went on. I went to work. I supervised a small wedding at a different venue, watching a father twirl his daughter in the middle of the dance floor while guests wiped their eyes. I drove home under the same streetlights. I bought groceries and answered emails about lighting setups and tablecloth colors. In the background, things shifted. Helen sent me short updates. A note that changes to the trust were moving forward. A line about internal policy revisions she was reviewing for our holding company. She asked simple questions. Did I intend to attend any planning meetings if invited? Did I want her present at any discussion? I answered that I would let her know when the time came. Marcus called once to say that Harbor Light had formally received an inquiry and then a tentative booking request under Chloe and Brandon's names, for the date I already had circled. He said there were calendar holds and draft contracts prepared, all under the standard format that tied back to our network. He did not take any final action without my input. I thanked him for keeping me informed. I did not tell him exactly what I planned, not yet. It was enough that he knew I would handle it properly. One evening, I sat at my kitchen table with the old photo album open again and the laptop off. The house was quiet. The calendar on the wall still showed the pink heart and, in my memory, the red circle on the whiteboard in the office. I was not hoping anymore that things would magically fix themselves. I was not hoping Chloe would call in tears, apologizing for everything. Hope had been replaced by something harder and more stable, a decision. I would let them walk all the way to the edge of the stage they had built with my help. I would wait until they were surrounded by the image they cared so much about. And then, in one controlled moment, I would step forward and show them what happens when you remove the foundation you do not respect. That thought did not make me feel happy. It did not feel like revenge in the loud, hot sense. It felt like finally putting a heavy object down after carrying it too far. A few nights later, as I was washing dishes, my phone rang. The number on the screen was Harbor Light's main line. I dried my hands and answered. Marcus's voice came through, warm but edged with the kind of tension that meant something important was coming. He said that Chloe and Brandon had confirmed their choice. Harbor Light Pavilion was now their official venue. They had scheduled their final walkthrough and contract signing for a Saturday afternoon in a few weeks, during one of the busiest times of the season. They wanted to see the ballroom one more time, plan the flow, and lock in all the details. Marcus said they had also asked if the decision-maker on the venue side could be present since they had some special requests. He had told them he would check. Then he asked me directly if I wanted to be there as that decision-maker. I looked out my kitchen window at the dark yard, the faint outline of the old tree, the quiet street. I thought about the long dinner table, the engagement party speeches, the dress shop receipt with my card on it, the group chat messages, the emails calling me only a wallet. I said yes. I told him I would be there. The Saturday of the walkthrough, Harbor Light was alive. Cars pulled up in a steady stream. Other couples toured side rooms. Staff hurried by with clipboards, the chandeliers in the lobby throwing patterns of light on the marble floor. I stood with Marcus near the front desk, wearing my old suit, watching the doors. Chloe and Brandon arrived with both sets of parents. They moved like a little parade, all dressed for photos, even though it was only a planning visit. I saw Chloe's eyes widen at the sight of the lobby again. For a second, I saw the child who used to spin in my living room. Then her expression smoothed back into the polished one I recognized now. Marcus greeted them first. He shook hands and introduced himself as the manager. Then he turned to me and, in a clear voice, introduced me as Mr. Reyes, senior partner in Harbor Light's parent group and the contracting party behind their bookings. The words hung there for a moment. I watched them land on each face. Brandon frowned, like he had misheard. Valerie's smile went tight. Andrew glanced at Chloe. She looked suddenly very young. Marcus led us to a small meeting room just off the ballroom. Through the glass wall, we could see staff setting up chairs for another couple's ceremony later that day. The room we sat in had a long table and a folder already laid out in the center. Marcus opened the folder. He slid the top document toward the middle so everyone could see. It was the standard event agreement, this one with my name typed clearly as client and sponsor. Underneath were internal booking summaries showing how their event had been tentatively held not only at Harbor Light, but at more than 50 related venues over the past weeks. He explained in his calm, professional tone that all of those holds and requests had flowed through accounts tied to my firm. Then he stepped back and let me speak. I told them, in plain words, that I had reviewed how my name and resources had been used. I referred to emails and messages, printed and clipped in the folder, where I was described as only a funder and a person to be hidden. I did not read them aloud. I only said that, under our contracts, those patterns triggered our right to refuse events that misrepresented our partners and damaged our reputation. Marcus then read the prepared notice. He stated that, effective immediately, the Harbor Light Group was canceling all current and pending bookings under Chloe and Brandon's names across 55 venues, releasing the dates to couples on the waiting lists. He added that deposits, where legally possible, were being returned to me as the original payer. Phones started vibrating around the table as confirmation emails arrived. I watched eyes drop to screens, then widen. I slid one last envelope toward Chloe. I said it contained a brief notice about her trust and the wedding funds, now frozen under the conditions she had chosen when she decided I did not belong in her story. I told her there were no surprises in it, only reflections of choices already made. No one spoke for a long moment. Outside the glass, a staff member began folding spare chairs, the metal legs clicking softly. I stood, buttoned my jacket, and told Marcus I trusted him to handle the rest. Then I walked out through the lobby, past the chandeliers and the couples waiting with hopeful eyes, leaving the sound of buzzing phones and raised voices behind me.